Hi everyone, I'm Kate Milliken. I am the founder of MyCounterpane, and I have been living with MS since 2006. And this is MyCounterpane one-on-one, and we are covering the future of progressive MS. With me is Dr. Fred Lublin, who works at the Corinne Goldsmith Dickinson Center for Multiple Sclerosis at Mount Sinai in New York City. Dr. Lublin is a practicing physician. He has also served at the National MS Society as the chair of its advisory committee on clinical trials of new MS drugs, as well as the research programs advisory committee. He has been a member. Dr. Lublin has authored numerous different articles, scientific articles, and served as a consultant to the National Institute of Health, the FDA, and numerous biotech companies who are involved with MS drug development. And I am thrilled to have Dr. Lublin with me. And I say this with reverence, Dr. Lublin. You are a veteran of the MS space. And one of the reasons why it's so great to have you here is you have such a good knowledge about MS as a whole. And certainly a lot of our viewers understand the amazing scientific progress that's happened in the realm of relapsing remitting MS, but not of progressive. And I feel like in terms of disease-modifying therapies with relapsing remitting MS, there have been obvious signs of progress, but not so much in progressive. And why do you think that is?
Oh, hi, Kate. I'm happy to be here. So 23 years ago, we started the era of treatment of multiple sclerosis with the first approved drug for treating relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Now, 23 years later, we see the horizon for doing the same thing with progressive MS. So our largest unmet need in 2016 is how to treat progressive MS. We have no approved therapies. We've had a number of unsuccessful attempts, and our general understanding of the mechanisms that underlie progressive MS is not as fine-tuned as it is for relapsing remitting MS. And that's stymied us in some ways. But the good news and the exciting news is that 2017 is going to be a banner year for our ability to approach, treat, and better understand progressive MS. So after a series of negative trials, and I should say that even when we do studies that don't work, that are negative, we learn lots. And you have to do the trials, including the ones that don't work, and analyze them, and it helps you moving forward. We get smarter and smarter with every study because we say, well, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? How do we fix that? So we now have two studies, one that's about to be published, one that has not yet been published. Both have been presented, which opened the door for treating progressive MS. And these include primary progressive MS, where one study with a modest but a definite result, and also for secondary progressive, one study with a modest but definite result. And then there's some smaller studies around molecules like simvastatin and biotin that are interesting, that need to be explored more. And so those studies are underway as well. But the two studies we have, one is with what's called an S1P1 modulator. That's a subclass of drug that's not yet available. And the other is with a molecule called ocrelizumab, which targets B cells. And so that one, again, is not yet available. But those studies will be coming out, and it's a start.
What for you, sorry to interrupt, but what for you over the years of being in the space, in terms of actually looking at progressive MS, what changed the viewpoint for researchers to actually start making progress?
Wasn't so much of change in viewpoint as it was trying different molecules. And even with the results we have now, the molecules that we have are anti-inflammatory. So we expect it to work very well. And in one case, we already have the information that works very well. In relapsing remitting MS, that effect also carried over, but to a lesser degree, with progressive MS, but it's the same strategy. So the challenge for us now is to say, well, who are the best individuals to apply that strategy to? And we have some hints in terms of age and amount of activity that's going on, but not enough yet to be definitive about who those populations are.
I'm sorry, amount of disease activity or amount of physical activity of the patient?
I'm sorry, disease activity.
Disease activity.
Whether it be either clinical attacks or changes on the MRI. And so moving forward, we have to get a better grasp on what the best population to treat with these agents are and who in fact needs a different strategy altogether. And there are some different strategies that are being tested at the moment or will shortly start testing phase.
So let's talk about these two studies that you feel are on the forefront in terms of where they are in terms of their phase, their trials and progress, and how soon they could actually get to a progressive patient.
So the first is the study with ocrelizumab, which is a study called Oratorio. That's been presented. It produced a positive result compared to placebo. Modest, but positive.
What defines modest, Dr. Lublin? 10% improvement rate?
24, it was about 24%. So that the group that was receiving the ocrelizumab had 24% less chance of progressing during the course of the study. So it didn't turn off all progression, but it was statistically significant, and it's a start. Now that particular agent, that's a phase 3, and so it's now under consideration by the FDA for approval, both for relapsing remitting, where they had 2 separate studies, and for primary progressive MS. The FDA is supposed to give an answer by the end of this year as to what they think in both those indications. And as is typical of them, we don't know what their deliberations are or what their decision will be, but we're anxiously awaiting it.
And making it to phase 3 is great progress.
It is. Yeah. It is. And again, we learned a lot about how to do the studies there because there have been other phase 3 studies of anti-inflammatories in primary progressive MS that haven't worked at all. And so now we have to say, well, what's different? You know, why did this anti-inflammatory, with agents that both work very well in relapsing remitting MS, why are they different in primary progressive? And that's something we just need to keep studying.
Yeah. And the other study?
The other study is with a molecule that's an S1P1. It's the next generation of fingolimod or Gilenya. Mm-hmm. It's a little more selective. And they did their study in secondary progressive MS, where also we haven't had any successful trials. And again, a modest result. It's about 21% difference between the treatment group and the placebo. But it's a start.
And in the world of progressive MS versus relapsing remitting, if I'm correct, in years past, there was an assumption that progressive MS was just a more severe form of relapsing remitting. And now that's changed. Is that true? I think what you're saying is correct. So it's not all MS becomes progressive. Before we had any treatments for relapsing remitting disease, there was a high likelihood that individuals would transition into a progressive phase. Our sense, because we don't have good data on this, but our sense is that in the treatment era, fewer people are going into a progressive phase, but there still are some who do. What we don't understand yet is what changes. So there's an important distinction here. One is people can get worse in MS by 2 different mechanisms. One is they have an attack and they don't completely recover. So they're left with some limp. Residue of sorts. Residual of some sort, right. And then they go along and then they have another attack and they have some more residual. And this sort of builds up to the point where they may actually have significant impairment. That's not progressive disease. Progressive disease is independent of what's happening with the attacks. The individual's gradually worsening over time. And some individuals, like primary progressive, may never have an attack, but just this onset and then gradual worsening over time. Now, it's not constant. You can have periods there where you plateau and such, but it's this idea of this gradual worsening rather than what's left over from the acute attacks that distinguishes progressive disease from just other types of worsening of MS. And in the world of being not only a outstanding clinician, but a researcher, talk about the mindset of other researchers that you interact with when you talk about progressive MS. Because I was lucky enough to go to an ECTRIMS conference, which is one of the largest world MS conferences that happens annually. And I felt like watching all of you was like a 7th grade slumber party in terms of the way you guys were talking in the hallways.
So we're now looking to see how we can better characterize progressive disease. And we've made recommendations that the field has generally accepted as to how we're going to subcategorize a disease. So, for example, we'll take a progressive patient and we'll say, well, over this period of time, are they progressing or are they stable? And also over this period of time, are they active or not active? And active meaning, are they still having relapses, or is their MRI still changing and such? And so those kind of distinctions may help us to better pick the individuals to treat with this therapy or that therapy.
So what about your work specifically, Dr. Lublin? Talk to me about that.
Well, we're looking at several things. We're looking at some additional ways to treat progressive disease. And also we're trying to look at better ways of imaging it. So I have colleagues here who are working with what's called an ultra high field MRI. It's called a 7 Tesla or 7T MRI, which takes beautiful pictures of the brain. And we're looking at that to see if we can make distinctions between relapsing, remitting, and progressive disease.
Within the MRI itself.
Using the MRI. Mm-hmm. And also whether, how different therapies affect those outcomes. And we're also trying to determine how to better define progressive disease. How early can we say that someone's actually progressing? And can we find a marker that says, yeah, this is now the onset of progressive disease? Because right now, just based on clinical experience, it takes a long time before you're pretty confident that someone has transitioned into this progressive phase.
So in kind of a bigger, more philosophical response here, how do you feel like the general mindset of making progress within progressive has changed?
Well, we've gone from having nothing to not only having these 2 successful phase 3, but more molecules coming in and better design strategies going on. For example, there's one study going on in Great Britain using a new type of design where you could test multiple agents and then you sort of stop along the way and knock off the ones that don't look promising and keep doing the others as a way of sort of rapid for MS, rapidly screening different agents. We also have a better understanding of some of the molecular mechanisms involved, and so we can employ new strategies. And we're learning more in the laboratories every day.
One of the things I also like is the fact that, spearheaded by the MS Society, there's the International Progressive MS Alliance. Is there anything you want to talk about that?
So this is a wonderful endeavor where the majority, all of the major international MS societies and the MS International Foundation came together, pooled funds and resources to specifically target progressive MS. Because it was time. And so the Alliance has generated lots of interest from researchers around the world. Some of the best in the world have submitted proposals, and they've had the difficult task of picking just a few because they didn't have as much money as they would like to fund all of them to start moving the field forward in terms of biomarkers and MRI and things of that sort. So it's a very exciting endeavor, and not only because this group is doing it, but because the MS research community has responded so nicely to it.
It's awesome. And then last question for you. In light of the patients and people who are living with progressive MS now, what would you recommend to them, or is there anything that you could speak to about things that they could do for their own health in the present versus the future?
So for the present, until we have an approved therapy, we sort of treat progressive MS on an ad hoc basis. But there are things individuals could do. So one of the important initiatives we're undertaking now is looking at the role of wellness. in a very positive sense, and not a sort of loosey-goosey thing, but actually looking at the things that will make a difference. So, for example, smoking. We know that smoking is specifically bad for MS. Not just that smoking is bad for your health, it's specifically bad for MS. But we're also looking at diet. There's lots of diet information out there on the internet. None of it is scientifically sound. None of it is proven. Much of it is contradictory. So we're looking to see how can we better study diet, because it's not an easy thing to do, but study it because there may be roles there. We know that there are interactions between the immune system and the bacteria in the gut. So we're looking at that. There's other issues. Weight, obesity may be a factor at certain periods in one's life that need to be looked at. Vitamin D needs to be studied. We know there are associations, but we don't know cause and effect. Exercise, activity, there's lots going on that people can do, and that's in addition to what we hope will be these therapeutic breakthroughs.
That's wonderful. And, you know, it's funny to be at a meeting and talk about the whole idea of actually clinically proving diet, that if you really think that through, you know, if there's a hypothesis that chocolate is good for MS, that somebody in a clinical trial actually has to eat chocolate for 90 days straight and not deter from that. And that actually is pretty hard to do, even if you like whatever's being tested. So
yeah, I'm not so sure I like that example, because I think I could eat chocolate for 90 days.
Noted. Well, you know, you were talking about obesity, so maybe we won't let you do that.
Well, that's true.
Dr. Lublin, it's a real pleasure to speak with you. I very much appreciate your time, and thank you for being on My Counterpane one-on-one.
Happy to be with you, Kate.
Thanks.